Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola. I'm the managing editor of Shadowproof, and welcome to this live stream. I'll be covering the FBI raids that were conducted against the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru Movement, as they are known, and the raids were carried out against their Uhuru House in St. Petersburg. There's also homes as well as a solidarity center in St. Louis, Missouri that were targeted. It was all part of an indictment against a Russian national named Aleksandr Ionov. And I don't think that the story has received the care and delicate examination that is needed. I don't think it's been reported fully. I've done some writing over at shadowproof.com. You can find a report over there if people are interested in the details. But the chairman of this African People's Socialist Party that has been around for 50 years, it's been around for 50 years. He is 80 years old. He'll be 81 soon. And he has given multiple statements, appeared on some smaller podcast shows, Black Power shows. And he is very open about what he did with this individual that was indicted, the group that was sponsoring a conference in Russia in which he attended. And I think there's a lot that we can get into here, and it's worth examining and talking about because of the history of repression against Black liberation activists here in the United States. Those involved in this organizing work and who were targeted connect this to the murder of Fred Hampton, the murder of Mark Clark in Chicago, and also they connect it to the attacks on Marcus Garvey. They connect it to the COINTELPRO activity that unfolded under J. Edgar Hoover when he was the FBI director. And so going to go through this, I see somebody saying 50 years and very little traction. Well, you know what? They're still around. They're still surviving, and they may not have gotten anywhere, but certainly that's not for lack of trying. And they've been able to organize their communities in such a way in which they actually feel like they have some worth and value in a society that dehumanizes them daily and treats them like property. They haven't advanced very far since they were slaves. There were Jim Crow laws involved, and then they started jailing people in prisons and incarcerating them and using the war on drugs in order to subjugate them. And that might have something to do with the little traction. I'm not sure if it's an indictment on their ability to organize. They seem to have been fairly effective in their immediate community, and maybe there are some things that are defective about their party, but we're not here to cast judgments on whether they've been effective in their organizing or not. We're here to talk about power. We're here to talk about people at the top who are within the FBI and who are within the U.S. government, who chose to single out this party as this group as being influenced by this Russian national. So that said, let's push on. And after dealing with that, let's push on to show you a clip that I have of the chair of this party, the founder of this party. It's 50-year-old party, goes all the way back to the 70s. And he is detailing this raid that was conducted. But before I play that clip, I just want to show you that this is how the media covered this topic. These are the headlines right now. If you dig through, how Russia interfered with a local Tampa Bay election, FBI raids Florida office allegedly used by Russia for election interference, Russian national charged with spreading propaganda through U.S. groups, Russian man spent years as puppeteer behind U.S. political groups, officials say. FBI says Russia and Uhuru Movement to used Uhuru Movement to undermine America. FBI says Russia used Uhuru Movement to undermine America. An African People's Solidarity Movement was used to undermine America. All right, so let me take that down. And let's play this clip. So I will play this for everyone so you can hear from the chairman who speaks about what happened. This was on their program, The Burning Spear, which is the video version of a media publication that's existed in some form since really the founding of this party.
This morning, 5 o'clock this morning, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, the organization that killed Malcolm X, killed Martin Luther King, killed Fred Hampton, killed so many African people who were trying to win our freedom, raided my house at 5 o'clock, an hour later than the time that they raided the house of Fred Hampton when they murdered him. At 4 a.m. In Chicago, Illinois in 1969. They raided my house. They came to the house and outside the house, we were alerted of their presence by a loudspeaker demanding that anybody in the house where we lived here in St. Louis come out with our hands up with nothing in our hands. And they said that they were the FBI. And because I knew some of the history that I just mentioned in terms of the assassination and killing of African leaders in the past, and because my wife was also there and who was a leader in her own right in our movement, I decided that I would go down the stairs to greet them first because I had no idea of what they would do. At the same time, they were talking over the loudspeaker. Flash bang grenades were going off throughout the neighborhood. They had broken a window downstairs in the basement in the house. They had broken in the house next door, the apartment next door. They had smashed the door in. So there's a huge racket that was going on outside. So I walked down the stairs. And when I opened the door, going down the stairs, a drone came into the door and almost hit my wife in the face as she was leaving the building. So when I get outside, what I see is that there is an armored vehicle in front of the house. There are combat-clad FBI agents all over the place carrying automatic weapons and what have you. They not only are in front of the house, they are occupying the porch and the yard of the neighbors next door. And this is a really poor and economically depressed community that we live in. So the flashbang grenades are still going off. When I get outside, they handcuff me. And they handcuff my wife, and they wanted to have me sit on the curb while they carried out their operation. They indicated to me that they had some kind of search warrant, and that this search warrant was related to an indictment that was coming down later in the day against a Russian national who was in Russia. And that somehow my name, my wife's name, was attached or associated with this indictment that they were going to be releasing in Russia. They refused to show me a search warrant, but of course they had the guns. And so they had the guns and they were able to enter and occupy my house for several hours. But when they had us outside, I finally asked them if we were free to leave because it was ridiculous what was going on. They were clearly not arresting us, and they were making a big show in the community, and people are watching these agents in front of our house.
So that's the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. That's Chairman Omari Yeshitela. and he is an unindicted co-conspirator. He's in this indictment against this Russian national. His name is, as I said earlier, I believe, Aleksandr Ionov. And this group had their homes targeted, as you just heard. The flashbangs are set off. He even says that the FBI went to his neighbor and on a Ring doorbell put tape over it so it would not record footage of the raid that could later be shared. And then the group had their office or their house in St. Petersburg raided about simultaneously. And they've had that as a base of operations for a good segment of their history. The group has organized in Oakland. The group's doing organizing in St. Louis in the community. And it's an impoverished area, as he says in his statement. And it's one in which I think, you're going to get a lot of attention of people when this armored vehicle parks in front of your home and is conducting this raid, taking and stealing your electronic devices. And then there's a solidarity center that they have. There's a solidarity group. This is a Pan-African group concerned with the liberation of all African people throughout the world. And there's a white group in the white area of St. Louis that is engaged in solidarity work led by white leaders. And the woman, Penny Hess, who is a leader, had her home raided by the FBI. And so this group, which people don't really know anything about, even though it's been around. It's so clear from the coverage, even though you could just go to their website and pull some basic details, that's not in there. And so I want everybody to know before I go too far that this is a group that is trying to continue what was started in the 1960s with Black revolutionary groups that were sprouting, that were making common cause with anti-colonialist struggles on the African continent, other parts of the world. It says on their page that Omali was part of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Most people who have a basic understanding of civil rights history have heard of SNCC. And he was someone who experienced what it was like in SNCC to be under assault by the U.S. government. He was arrested after tearing down what they describe as a degrading racist mural from the wall of the St. Petersburg, Florida City Hall during a demonstration. And then he got support in the community, but was sentenced to 5 years in prison. And later organized something called the Junta of Militant Organizations in 1968 as a Black Power organization. They were looking at the Black Panther Party and came up with JOMO, which they say was appropriated from Jomo Kenyatta, who was widely and mistakenly believed at the time to be the leader of the Mau Mau, the revolutionary anti-colonial organization in Kenya, also known as the Land Freedom Army. And so of this period, when African working class people were organizing in the States, making links with different groups around the world and showing solidarity, this is work that he was doing. It did not escape the sort of COINTELPRO targeting that happened from the FBI. So certainly Omari Yeshitela is no stranger to being targeted by the FBI. So now let's go to this indictment and let's hear, or let's read what we're told. And this case seems to come from allegations that the group was being influenced by Russian nationals with links to Russian intelligence who were involved in interfering in the U.S. election. And we're still talking about the U.S. election in 2016. We're not talking about 2020. This is still the family of alleged acts that the FBI and others have been fixated on for the last 6 years and apparently have not been able to move beyond. Even though they haven't been able to squeeze out a whole lot of evidence, but they're using this and they keep coming back to it and making allegations of interference in the election. Excuse me. Nose is itchy. Okay, so go back to his name's Aleksandr Ionov, and they say that he is the president and founder of this anti-globalization movement of Russia that's headquartered in Moscow. And, you know, for the most part, with some exceptions, I'm gonna take them at their word in their indictment. Although some of the things are ridiculous, and I won't consider it. But yeah, okay, he's the founder and president of this group. I know that to be true because Omari says in the video that he did go to this conference, and there was this conference organized about the self-determination of people, and he was there. I mean, he's been to conferences like that this group had organized. He said he went to it, and there was one in which there were white people there from secessionist movements in California and in Texas, which he was not entirely on board with. Particularly when it came to Texas, he didn't want to be involved with white people who want to secede from the United States because that is colonized land. If any Mexicans want to talk about seceding and reclaiming Texas, he would be for it. But it was just really bizarre to see white people talking about liberating Texas or leaving the United States. So anyways, apparently Ionov is involved here and has connections to Russian intelligence. That is allegedly documented in this group. And then it says that Ionov was using members of these U.S. political groups as foreign agents of Russia within the United States. Goes on to say that that these conferences were being sponsored by the anti-globalization movement, and that these conferences were to encourage the participating groups to advocate for separating from their home countries. That I know of, the Uhuru haven't argued that they should not be part of the United States. I haven't found that in any of their literature. But in any case, at these conferences, Ionov entered into a partnership with some of these groups, including groups in Florida and California. He then allegedly exercised direction or control over the groups on behalf of Russian intelligence, on behalf of the FSB. So I'll say that again because I don't believe it. Exercised direction or control over these groups on behalf of the FSB. He also monitored and regularly reported on their activities to the Russian intelligence, It says that he provided financial support to the groups, directing the groups to publish pro-Russian propaganda, as well as other information designed to cause dissension in the United States and to promote secessionist ideologies. He coordinated and funded direct action by the groups within the United States that was designated to further Russian interests, and coordinated coverage of the group's activities in Russian media outlets. Perhaps, but that's in Russia. That's not here. So I don't know why that needs to be of any concern to me as an American. All right. So this unindicted co-conspirator, and there's other unindicted co-conspirators, but as I said, they don't name Yeshitela, but Omari Yeshitela is in this as a citizen who resided in St. Petersburg, Florida at the time, and traveled to Russia and entered into a partnership. But they're saying he failed to register as a foreign agent with the with the U.S. government. So This goes on, and they describe the nature of foreign influence operations by Russia generally, allegedly, and very big quotes, because this is just, it's just what the FBI and the Justice Department says. And then they talk about these communications that were ongoing, and it describes what's going on with political group one, and that is the African People's Socialist Party. And that those acting at its discretion would engage in agitprop, or agitation and propaganda, by writing articles that contained Russian propaganda and disinformation, sending these articles by email or encrypted electronic messages. Okay, so he's drafting this material, they claim, and then they're sending it to the Uhuru Movement, or this Black liberation group, and instructing them to publish those materials in media outlets. So the first problem I have with that is the idea that that the group needs any help with developing their propaganda. Like, they don't already have this. Like, Ionov is actually feeding them material that they can get published. This is a radical political party, a small group of individuals who have been organizing for decades and have very well developed ideas about class, capitalism, about racism, about oppression, US imperialism, organizing solidarity. You go down the list of things that are popular to discuss within left-wing circles. They have a position. They've dug into those ideas. They did not need a Russian. Anyways, as further part of this, they say that he was consulting, instructing, and promoting these groups I already mentioned, in Russian outlets. So they get specific later on in the indictment, and they say that specifically to the Uhuru movement, that they offered an all expenses paid trip to Moscow, Russia. Ionov did. And then the meeting took place. Another thing that they include in this indictment that is incredible to me is they highlight a 2015 United Nations petition that was published by this group, by the African People's Socialist Party, and it accused or alleged that the U.S. was engaged in genocide against African people in the United States, and directed the people to, they wanted everyone to sign this and get on board so that they could take this message to the United Nations in New York. And so they have people signing this petition. And this sounds crazy. It sounds like something that Russians are planting. But I would like everyone to know that here in Chicago, there was a group of youth organizers that started something called We Charge Genocide, and they were involved in getting the United Nations to recognize this in the same rubric that there had actually existed this decades ago. And what they did was these youth were going to the United Nations Committee Against Torture with a delegation. They were getting them to look into their documentation, research, and look at the effects of police violence from the Chicago Police Department, look at deaths of people in the community in Chicago, look at the profiling, the harassment, the excessive force that was used. And essentially, the Committee Against Torture accepted a lot of the concerns of these young people, and that there's a lot of death happening. And we're open to what these groups here in Chicago came to share. I'm based in Chicago, just for those of you who don't know where I'm based. And so I'm very familiar with this action that occurred, that they're also presenting to this Committee Against Torture, the fact that there's a legacy of police torture here in Chicago. from commanders like John Burge and others who were involved in the city recently. It took a struggle, but they passed reparations, and they put together a torture memorial for survivors. And so this was a group that was involved in charging genocide, alleging genocide within the United States. I think in much the same way that the African People's Socialist Party wanted to do. And I have their petition in front of me, and it basically starts off like this. Again, they don't need to get this language from Russia. This is just apparent. This is the actions. These are the actions of the U.S. government over the last century or longer. We, the undersigned, charge that the United States government has historically committed the crime of genocide against African people inside its borders, continues to do so today, often with the complicity of many U.S. citizens. It's in the interest of all freedom-loving peoples worldwide to unite with African people colonized within the borders of the United States in our struggle for our basic human rights of freedom from state-imposed violence and oppression, and for self-determination and liberation with economic and political control over our lives and communities. We will show that despite the heroic struggle of African people for our civil and constitutional rights during the 1960s, African people exist today under conditions which the U.S. state powers not only fail to protect our health and well-being as expected under full citizenship, but continually inflict state or state-supported violence and terror on us. Although millions of African people perished on the slave ships on the journey from Africa to the Americas, and though millions of African people were slaughtered by European and American colonizers throughout Africa, and though hundreds of millions of indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere were murdered by Europeans, it is, it is notable that the word genocide did not exist in the English lexicon until its coinage in 1944, in response to the Nazi government. This petition recognizes that the term genocide is applicable to Africans in the U.S. for the conditions they face, and then invokes the conventions of international law, goes through that. This was the petition. This was put on change.org. This is what's in the indictment. This is what's got the FBI and Justice Department concerned. In this petition, we present a synopsis of documented evidence proving that the crime of genocide by the U.S. government against African people has been committed, that the examples presented apply to every aspect of the definition of genocide. The U.S. government is responsible for mass murder, mass and discriminatory imprisonment, oppressive conditions in nearly every aspect of life, including state-sanctioned violence and murder, education, family life, reproduction, employment, healthcare, and freedom of political assembly for African people. There's a full petition. Wasn't the general one that was posted to change.org. And then they make some demands. And they say that there should be a recognition by the international community and progressive and friendly states and peoples that Europe and U.S. powers committed genocide. They ask for an international tribunal to make judgment on these crimes. They want reparations. They want the right to self-determination and liberation and the unification of Africa and African people on the continent of Africa, and those who have been forcibly dispersed around the world be made possible. Again, they want Black community control of police inside the U.S. And there's other demands that they go on to list. The one final demand is that there is an international monitoring body that'll cover daily the police violence against African people. Okay, all of these demands are rooted in what we've seen time and time again in this country. And they are radical solutions to the problem, rooted in a belief about what can be done to bring all of this to an end. And so the idea that this comes from Russia is ludicrous. And there isn't any evidence in this that Russian intelligence is driving the agenda of this group at any juncture in this, since the raids. When you look at the indictment, there isn't any evidence, but what they do effectively is they have now tarnished this group that has organized in some small capacity and made some positive impact on a community level, modeled after the ethos, modeled after the culture of the Black Panthers and other groups where they recognize that nobody is going to come and save them, and that they have to provide for their own defense, that they have to take their own militant action to protect themselves from police terrorism, that they have to be able to provide. And in fact, when they were raided, they were about to go. His wife was about to go help with this training of doulas who can come and take care of Black mothers, because something that happens in the United States that's part of this, what I believe they'd allege genocide, is that the mortality rate for a Black woman giving birth is much, much higher, significantly higher than it is for someone who is white or of light skin color. And so all of this, you read this, it says Ionov sent $500 to the Uhuru Movement. What did that get? What did that get? It says that they published a petition, as I already mentioned. It says that there's a Dialogue of Nations conference. This is the conference that Yeshitela attended. And they say that the anti-globalization group is a solid institution of Russian politics, and that he made it clear that it was an instrument of the Russian government, and that apparently that did not disturb Yeshitela. And so this is something that they're worried about. They're worried about this reparations tour that took place, which Ionov allegedly supported in 2016. There was organizing work that's going on. It continues by this Black liberation group to seek reparations for slavery. And there are other groups that are involved in this in some way or another as well. But again, all of this activity that is documented, this traveling, is nothing out of the ordinary. It is nothing that changed the outcome of any election. We're still in Buff Bernie land. We're still in this land that we were, where the government is finding advertisements that only maybe a few thousand, tens of thousands of people even remember seeing out of tens of millions of people in the United States. They paid for a hotline that's a joke about Jesus and masturbation. There are other ads that people allegedly saw that they claim Russia was involved in funding. And so like that was going to swing the election. It doesn't make any sense at all. And they take these groups that were on the fringes of U.S. politics and that apparently were getting funding for their demonstrations that they weren't even capable of organizing. So in this indictment, they also reference that this man Ionov is allegedly supporting a secessionist campaign in California by a right-wing person who doesn't even live in California anymore. But his home wasn't raided, and you probably can guess why his home was not raided. And that's because our history doesn't have one in which people who are white and engage in right-wing politics typically have to fear the FBI showing up to their home with a battering ram to go through their house and steal their computers and devices and everything. Now, I want to show you the message from Yeshitela outside his home when he had some more pointed statements to say. I believe I'll give him the last word, but there's a connection that has to be made here about what we saw with these raids. This took place in 2010. A lot of you out there may not know that under President Obama's administration, there were raids against anti-war activists and international solidarity activists in Chicago, in Minneapolis, and in other parts of the Midwest. About 24 people were raided. They were issued grand jury subpoenas. They were accused of material support for terrorism in September 2010. It was a fishing expedition that they were going on after they infiltrated and spied upon activists who were organizing a march in St. Paul against the Republican National Convention. They had an infiltrator named Karen who was trying to entrap people into committing illegal acts, and she wasn't very successful. They kept these activists under a cloud of investigation for 10 years, and these are activists who organized for Palestinian solidarity and solidarity with people who were in a left-wing group in Colombia. I believe they were tied to the FARC. And these people had made trips to Colombia, they'd made trips to Palestine, and they didn't make any apologies for their strong stances in support of those people there who were fighting for their self-determination. And so this is, I think, a continuation of them coming down on this group. It's, it's no accident that we see that they're raiding and that they'll present them as pawns, dupes, like they don't know, like the FBI is saving them from Russian influence. Not only are they saving us from Russian propaganda, but they're saving them. Maybe they don't fully recognize how they're being used by the Russian government. And so this committee to stop FBI repression, I just want to tell you what their statement was, that they mentioned that this comes at a time when the U.S. is engaged in an imperialist proxy war with Russia in the Ukraine, and these raids have all the makings of a witch hunt. All progressive people should oppose any attempt by the FBI and police to attack people's movements and organizations. We must always be vigilant about defending our democratic rights to organize and speak out against injustice, including communicating with activists in other countries and building international solidarity. It should also be said, this repression comes in the context of an upsurge of struggle in the Black community. And I think that's an important note to make. What they haven't said in the indictment is what they believe is the crime here. He's an unindicted co-conspirator, and there's others there. But somebody with ties to the Russian government, in 2015, it is not a crime to associate with those people. I think it is now after the war in Ukraine, but at least that's how they treat it. But the fact that they would want to make links with people in Russia, it's absolutely acceptable and okay back then. So what if that person was carrying out the Russian government's agenda? The bottom line here is that nothing changes about the Black liberation groups organizing. It doesn't affect what the Uhuru movement. It doesn't make them more effective or less effective than they were before this national got engaged with them. So they remind people that they know from experience how important resistance to repression is. This is the committee to stop FBI repression that's made up of these activists, along with a partner organization. And so they just in general say, all those active in the movements for peace and justice should use this moment as a reminder to never speak with agents of the federal government prying into your activism or the activism of others. You just say, I have nothing to say. Please speak with my lawyer. That's all you need to say. If you are being taken into custody, all you are required by law to do is confirm your name and tell them that you would like to speak with your lawyer. If a federal or local agent shows up at your home or organizing office, don't let them in without a warrant. If they have a warrant, inspect the details of the warrant closely. And if any detail is incorrect, such as the spelling of a name or address, point that error out and don't permit entry onto the premises. Now, they sort of forced their way on. And Yeshitela says that, as you heard, that he has to see a warrant. They wouldn't show him a warrant. So nothing was ever provided that would be proof that they were being targeted. Now, okay, so we will, also I'll say to you that there's been some scandal in the right-wing media about the FBI and what they hid on the Hunter Biden laptop. And Chuck Grassley wants to hold hearings, and improve everything for FBI whistleblowers. And I think in general, we need better mechanisms so FBI whistleblowers can come forward without intimidation. But what about this corruption? What about this, where they go into a community and they don't knock on the door? There's nothing violent about a nearly 81-year-old black revolutionary, other than the fact that it is the biggest boogeyman for the FBI throughout its last 50 to 60 years of existence, of being at war with these people. And they could have easily gone in there, knocked, asked questions, shown a warrant, taken the property that they wanted. They just did not want to be sensible. They want to use force, and it's how that's how they act. And so we all are worked up, or the right's all worked up about what the FBI is hiding about Hunter Biden. Meanwhile, this is the abuse of power. What the FBI and Justice Department is doing through another bullshit Russian investigation into alleged influence and interference in the election. That's the abuse of authority. That's what we have to be concerned. And tarnishing this group that's existed for 50 years, that is trying to make an impact in the community, to improve it, when there's disinvestment and they aren't taken care of by those who are in their city government. They are disposable to many of those who run their community, and disregarded. And so they're involved in trying to train people and get them jobs after they're out of prison. They're involved in working with the youth and giving them a feeling of self-worth, and growing them as people, and treating them that they do matter. And they're doing all this different organizing work that fits within a lot of that I've already spoken about. So here, finally, before I am done, this is Omari Yeshitela outside his home, the home that was raided in St. Louis, and he was speaking to the press. And I can't say it any better. In the moment when he needed to, he had the right words to set the press straight. And I'm sorry that this doesn't make it into the local news media. I'm sorry that it doesn't make it into the New York Times or the Washington Post, but it's here. And this is what people should hear.
Secondly, yes, I have been to Russia, but I've also been to South Africa. I've been to Ghana. I've been to various other places in Africa. I've been to Nicaragua. I've been all kinds of places where oppressed people are organizing, because black people need not to be isolated. And that's what this government would do. They would have us isolated, assuming that there is nothing that we can turn to except Joe Biden, who turned loose 100,000 policemen in the street with his omnibus crime bill that's probably killed Mike Brown. And the Russians didn't kill Mike Brown, by the way. Nobody said a Russian did that. That was an American domestic soldier that they called the police that killed Mike Brown. So you want me to hate Russians? And no, I don't hate Russians, but I hate those people who killed Mike Brown, and I hate the institutions that's responsible for that. So I wanted to say that. And to be clear about that, I'm not unabashedly a black man, an African that's committed to the liberation of black people, the African and all the other oppressed peoples on the planet Earth. And the United States has always historically been opposed to the liberation of oppressed people, opposed to freedom in Nicaragua, opposed to freedom in Afghanistan, opposed to freedom in South Africa. Mandela, from your perspective, at one time was a terrorist. Fidel Castro, how many times has the U.S. government tried to murder Fidel Castro? This is the reality that we're talking about, and so we are unabashedly on our own side. So I just want to say that in terms of what happened. Let me just say, they actually sent a drone into this house. They said we were not charged with anything. That's what they said. They handcuffed me and my wife out here. They wanted me to sit on the curb while they were carrying this out, something that I refused to do. They wanted my wife to sit on the curb out here, that she refused to do. The only thing we do is fight for black people, black power. All you got to do is walk through North St. Louis and you can see the changes that we've brought here as a party for black people. And the government is opposed to that, and that's why we are under attack, and also because they see us as pawns that they can use in this propaganda war against Russia. That's why black people who make this mistake of assuming that what's happening in Afghanistan or what's happening in Russia and Ukraine have nothing to do with us, clearly it does have something to do with us. The United States government clearly says it has something to do with us. And what they have done also is tried to create a situation where there is the appearance that anybody, black people who oppose, who criticize what the United States government is doing to us must be the employ of Russia. Like somehow Russia killed Mike Brown, that somehow we needed the Russians to tell us that we were oppressed. That's a hell of a statement. It's a disgusting, slanderous statement that black people don't have enough sense to know who it is that's killing us, murdering us, and keeping us living in these conditions. And I've been to Russia, and I didn't see Russians living like black people live right here in North St. Louis. That's the reality.
So there you go. That's Omari Yeshitela. And as he says, I didn't see black people living in Russia the way they have to live here in St. Louis. I'm sure that that statement extends to St. Petersburg, probably extends to Oakland, extends to a lot of communities in which groups like the African People's Socialist Party have tried to make an impact and to do whatever they can up against a system that not only doesn't want to have anything to do with their agenda, but has frequently, through the last 50 to 100 years, deployed federal agents to stop them from making an impact that could help those that are from their community. So there you go. And also, this is a nearly 81-year-old man. He's more lucid and has more wits, and he's eloquent and well-spoken. And Joe Biden doesn't even have a fraction of the charisma that Omari Yeshitela has. And so it's clear that, like, this is what the powers that be are afraid of. They've always been afraid of organizers like this who could have an impact. Certainly, if Russia was giving lots of money to someone who is a figure that has been around this long, if they gave that kind of money and he was able to expand his reach and it posed some kind of threat to the capitalists in Washington, D.C., they would run for cover. There'd be, you'd see what they did in Philadelphia to move. That'd be happening to the African People's Socialist Party. They'd be dropping bombs on the Uhuru House, and they'd be saying that they were taking out a Russian backed black militant operation. And but he'd never taken a cent from Russians, and they're not really funding, and that's not where the money comes from. And I would bet that they're probably a group that doesn't get a whole lot of money from anywhere other than in the communities and they live. And also, the way that he spoke was that they've been able to convince white people to pay money to help make up for the legacy that their ancestors have in subjugating black people in St. Louis. And they've been putting that money to work to improve areas of the neighborhood in and around where he does his organizing. And so that, everyone, that is what they're talking about when they say that this group was a pawn for spreading Russian propaganda. And now that I've done the work that I needed to do as a journalist to show you just how bullshit that all is, I think we can wrap up, because it should be abundantly clear that all the headlines missed what was really going on. And if anything, this whole idea of invoking Russia was just an excuse to allow the FBI to go back to its roots where it's comfortable. It's always been comfortable. No matter what James Comey wants to say about the FBI and how it's progressed, it is still very much an institution capable of the intimidation, harassment, and attacks on black people that J. Edgar Hoover so loved to carry out against those communities. So thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you all. Appreciate your support. Those of you who contribute and fund and are members and donors to shadowproof.com, you can go there and see the full story on this if you want any more specific details, which I wrote. But also separately, I'll just put this up here. Plug thedissenter.org. Here's a website that I cover. It's a little bit separated from the radical politics that I discussed here in this broadcast, but I cover whistleblower stories as well as the case against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange there. And so you can go there for that work. But that's all for this. That's all for this live stream and my breakdown of this indictment. I don't know anything about Ionov. I'll be clear. I don't know. I'm not sure what he's doing for the Russian government, but I'm sure that he's not undermining democracy, and I'm sure he's not interfering in our elections. I'm sure that he's not responsible for the propaganda that we're reading. I think if anybody's undermining democracy, if anybody is making it hard for people to have free and fair elections in the United States, it's the very people who live in the United States who are aligned with parts of the Democratic or Republican parties who don't want the grassroots to have a voice, who disenfranchise Black people in the hundreds of thousands, who are gerrymandering. That's what the Republican Party is doing. But what they don't tell you when they're talking about preventing another January 6th, what the Democrats don't tell you is that they are going after people who want third parties, who want a multi-party system, that they're intimidating people who sign petitions to get Green Party candidates on the ballot. What they don't tell you is that they'll rig their own party's primaries so that grassroots candidates don't beat the person that they select as the guy or the woman who is going to be their nominee on a national level, and also when it comes to congressional or Senate seats. So we don't need Russia. And in the future, it's going to be China that's meddling. But neither of those countries have to get involved in order for us to destroy ourselves. We destroy ourselves from within. They don't do anything. Maybe they talk about it so that they can feel better than the United States. Maybe they tell their people in Russia, the Chinese tell their own people, or the Russians tell their own people stories so that they don't have to correct their own abuses. But beyond that, we do a good enough job of destroying ourselves. So thank you. And I'll be back soon with another live stream.